All right, I guess first and foremost, quick introduction. Most of my career have been on your side of the stage. So I've run data analytics platforms globally for companies like Nike, Zendesk, American Eagle, Philips, Concur. And I began my career working at the NSA in the intelligence community. So first and foremost, security is always going to be at my core of my heart. About a year ago, I actually switched, I'll say, on the other side of the table. I was the chief data officer at Okera, who was recently acquired by Databricks. And I actually reached out directly to the founders here at Dremio because, frankly, I believe the technology that popped out offered something that I needed for a very long time. So the talk has a bunch of buzzwords in it. We're going to navigate around that, but what I really want to highlight and make it real for you all is stuff that we're actually seeing in the field. And I'm also going to highlight that from, frankly, some of my pain that I imagine I'll get a bunch of head shaking in the crowd too. And I know a lot of you feel a lot of this pain too, and obviously that's why we're here, to be able to learn from each other. So I'd say let's just jump right in. At Dremio, I kind of live in multiple areas between product strategy, kind of our go-to-market messaging, as well as about half of my week every week I spend with customers, actually helping design data architectures and connecting the data transformation with the actual digital transformation, right? Because as you'll see in one of my slides, like my fun comment I say way too many times is nobody funds architecture. So let's just jump right in. I learned very early in my career the hard way that in order to really drive transformation, you got to understand the past, respect the present, and then go define the future. This is why I won't say things like legacy, because obviously those are operational systems that run the business today. So being able to respect those while trying to drive the transformation and bringing along the people and not just basically being a skunkworks organization. So I do want to kind of highlight here and just let's do a quick review of what got us here today, right? And the one thing I want you all to anchor on is transformation, especially even in technology, doesn't happen because technology, right? Those engineering teams aren't often funded to drive technical innovation, right? And frankly, most companies don't cross the chasm because technology is cool. Right? If you look at this view a slightly different way, what you really see is better decisions need to be made faster. Teams needed more access to resources, and customers demanded more near real-time and continuous-based experiences, right? But what did that mean for the core infrastructure team? And my fun here is I don't think there was a material change or difference really until we hit this lakehouse piece of this picture. And what I mean by that is if you go back to like the OGs in the room who are still here today, right, your Teradatas, Netezas, and so forth, right, they still run, in my mind, like 60 to 70% of the infrastructure in the world, right? And why? Because it works, right? But what did it mean to scale that up? And I remember trying to literally convert closets into server rooms to be able to expand out capacity, right? And it just had to be a better way, right? And there had to be a faster way. When I was at Philips, the teams used to tell me, that, how did you get your capabilities? They say, well, I call Rackspace once a quarter and tell them what I'm going to do, and stuff showed up. Right? It just doesn't work that way anymore. So when we shifted up, and right, I like to attribute this like to the Martin Fowlers of the world and really going from a domain-driven design, can we start logically separating those things, right? And what was cool about Fowler at the time was it made complete sense, right? And when Hadoop in the world was spinning up, and at the same time, if you think about it from a technical side, this is where open source really started hitting its boom. And I used to say when I was on cabs, this room will innovate faster for you than you ever will if you let us. And I think that's the cool thing that everybody starts now expecting openness in your architecture from those points. But what happened? I don't know, like, I almost want to ask, like, how many people in here know more than 4 really good Hadoop people? And I mean like really good. Okay, 1, 2 hands. Maybe there's 3 I'm missing. I know like 4, and I worked at a lot of places. And one time in my agency, I had a 90-person Hadoop team just on one implementation, right? So how does the technology work? Not that well, right? But again, it still runs the ecosystems that are out there today, so you got to give it the respect it still deserves. So as we shifted into cloud data warehouse, right, and massive respect to Snowflake, I was Snowflake's second biggest customer at Nike, and I would have spent anything on Snowflake, because it gave me 2 things I couldn't do. 1, separate storage and compute. Right? I didn't need to go find the closet space. But 2, it gave me the ability to be cloud agnostic. Right? And that started really fully becoming a thing where I'm going, no, I want the compute capabilities of an AWS competitor, but I want the infrastructure maturity of an AWS, right? But then I want to run my Databricks ecosystem somewhere else in another cloud, right? And not have to worry about the Databricks piece, right? So again, it was about building the right experiences for my customers. But we all still generally had the same problem, is we're continuing to get locked into different proprietary, I'll say not just formats, but pieces, right? So, because even in the Databricks piece, even with it open, it's like, well, good luck trying to take your code base out of that. I don't know if any of you have done that type of migration. Same thing within a Snowflake, but again, it was giving you capabilities you couldn't find anywhere else in the world. And I think this is where the material shift really started hitting, where you see a lot of the best of the other parts of the ecosystem in the world coming together. And I think, and this is where I say massive respect to Databricks, coining the term lakehouse, because it allowed you now to start thinking about agnosticating a lot of those underlying sources, right? You're now thinking about open as a priority in your architecture underneath of everything. And you're thinking, and one thing I usually tell customers is, it shouldn't take you 7 to 10 years to rip out a Dremio if you don't want to use it anymore. It should take you 1 to 2 because of the use cases tied to it, not because it's hard. And I think that's the part of these patterns, right? And most folks are thinking going, I want cloud agnostic, I want things built on open source, or I want an orientation to open within your architecture ecosystem, right? When I was at Zendesk, I had over 250 SaaS applications powering Zendesk. How could you ever connect all of that, right? So it needed to be easy and flexible, and I think this is where you're starting to see the change. And when we look ahead now, and I'm not going to differentiate mesh from fabric. I can get into a fussy debate if anybody wants to have over there. I don't think that's the point that matters. The point that matters is mesh really started introducing the idea that I can put more power in the business user's hands, right, and take a lot of the pain that shouldn't be in the data engineer's hands and put it in the business, but in a way that's not the data cowboy problem we had years ago when we talked about data democratization, where people got into trouble, or they took down operational systems, right? These patterns now, we got the capability across multi-platforms to be able to do that safely. And I think that's where we're going to start seeing things move forward. And you got companies like DBT that are allowing you now to go, well, can I even have reuse of even my code base? And so even with Dremio donating Nessie, right, can I start thinking about my data products or even data assets, whether that's a table, a model, or otherwise, and actually treat it the same way I would do as the actual core product of my company, which means code checks, which means being able to do full-on testing, which lets me roll back because somebody changed an up system Salesforce column, and it took out 5 of my top 10 dashboards. And yes, that's happened to me before. But being able to quickly roll that back, because when that happened to me, it took me a whole day to figure it out. Why can't we just do that in seconds or minutes, right? Because you can't always forecast those problems. So all that said, that was a really cool diagram of views, but most folks still have the Oracles in the world, the Netezas, the Hadoops. They have multi-cloud. They're looking at lakehouse as a pattern. They're looking at mesh, right? This is the world we still operate in. It's still kind of nasty, right? So we need a maturity path to be able to get there and to start kind of separating. And my fun down here, and we can even get in debates on data contracts and such, is even orientated around that dark data. We still kind of want it because we know there's probably a data scientist somewhere wicked smart that we haven't hired yet that's going to transform our company. I still hope for it, at least. So I want to point down to the bottom right. The thing not to ignore in all of this is, in the world that we're operating in, our microeconomic climate, is the compelling economics. The one thing I continue to hear on is every single feature we release, or every single thing you're talking about integrating with, what does that mean for TCO, right? I'm being constantly asked to do more with less, and I'm incessantly asked for my business to do more, right? So we still need to drive better transformation experiences, while at the same time, we still have all that legacy architecture underneath of us. And I said I wouldn't say legacy, but. So what does that mean? That means our patterns need to shift. They need to change. We can't keep doing things the same way, right? So ETL shifts more into ELT. Yes, there's danger there, right? But how we navigate that matters. And we need to start thinking about how do we make it more simple for folks to interact with the data and not just put all that straight on central engineering teams. So finding common languages like SQL that's easier for folks to understand and learn, and use the momentum of Gen AI that allows SQL to be auto-generated off of natural language, right? That's where everybody's starting. So this is kind of the view is well, that's cool. What does this mean? How do we make it real? So I do want to call out a couple of customers that are building out their data mesh with Dremio, but not to the normal way. The cool part of this is that I want to start with MSK. So MSK was initially looking at doing data virtualization, and they were like, well, can you just help us do this? Because I have way too many CSVs, way too many emails going out in the world. I can't really govern that. I have no idea what's happening to my data. And my initial response when I was chatting with the lead there was like, yeah, I don't know if there's still a company that I've ever even worked at that still knows where all their data is, but it shouldn't be that bad, right? So just by connecting and doing the virtualization piece, what they ended up finding, doing both a mesh and a lakehouse type of architecture, combining those best of breed principles, they immediately found out that they can eliminate about 90% of their Kafka footprint. Because one, I don't need to be using data copies everywhere. I don't need to be incessantly enriching all this. And three, I didn't know what was happening after the copy moved anyway, right? So there had to be a better way. And what that in turn also turned into is 4 data engineers, not just on the platform side, 4 data engineers of efficiency that they found that they were able to free up for new opportunities. So again, it's not a, I'm worried about layoffs. This is a, hey, I'm thinking about what I can do more, and I'm freeing up people thinking about the problem differently. And my favorite example on here is actually TransUnion. And TransUnion, in a similar way, they want to say is, well, can we go after some really meaty, nasty problem in the world? After our initial work with them on a Hadoop and Oracle modernization initiative. And the really cool thing they decided was, well, what if we started combining external data resources with internal data resources? What could happen? Could we do something transformative? And what they found is they were able to actually take farmers in India with no access to capital previously and actually generate over 80 million people new access to capital. And they said, well, could this even scale? This sounds really cool. They brought it to the US and hit another 20 million. So they basically opened up over 100 million people that could never have access to the former capital in the farming industry, new access to capital. And oh, by the way, they also saved 14 data engineers in the process. So all this to say, like, what does that process or phasing look like? So this is the 3-phase piece. So first one is, I say, unified data access, right? And at the core of this one, it's truly like more of that virtualization type of story. But I want to be extremely clear, don't stop at virtualization. Virtualization doesn't help you fully on the performance side. Virtualization also doesn't help you define and do ownership of the assets that are being created. What it does is it makes it easier to get access to the data, while at the same time on the central teams, it agnosticates the underlying sources. Right? So the teams don't go directly to Oracle. The teams don't go directly into BigQuery. Right? The teams interact at a higher level, and the semantic layer also moves up to a higher level. So if you wanted to make any of the changes underneath, it's much easier and faster to do so, because you're not disrupting their day-to-day life. So all that said, you do the phase 1 to move into step 2. If you already have, obviously, a data lake, this is much faster and easier to do. But this is the part where you start moving in your modern data stack. And I use my air quotes there, because what I really mean is this is where you start finding your TCO. This is where you start going, like, what patterns or platforms can I start bringing in or replacing? Right? I had a leader once hit me on the head and said, if you ever try to bring another piece of software in here, you need to deprecate at least 2 other ones. Right? So this is where this starts to happen, right? And what do you normally see? This is where you're finding your TCO, right? I think most of the platforms I've ever brought in my past, I self-funded. I renegotiated my BI license. I switched from a Adobe implementation to a GA4, right? Those are the pieces where you can go, cool, I can now kind of self-fund and show the innovation that allow me to fund in the longer term, right? And I think this is where you should also expect on the engineering team to drive a better performance and experience for the engineers. And I got a couple examples here. So just with Renaissance Re, for example, with S3 and Dremio, just plugging it in, not using reflections or anything else, their performance alone dramatically improved, right? And when they started using reflections, obviously dramatic from 33 to 3 is big. It's not as much as 4200 to 33. And I think these are the pieces where being able to create quick wins and show fast value, right? And if you think about that in context of the actual cost, here's an example, and I like to say a lot of people ask for benchmarks. Every vendor that will ever send you a benchmark report will show they're faster. So I prefer never to show those. What I'd rather do is show stuff customers have sent us unsolicited. So this is an example of a Fortune 50 customer that just on the infrastructure alone, not taking account of resourcing, not taking account of data movement and copies and so forth, just on infrastructure alone. And this was the most mature Trino implementation I've ever seen. already they saw 120K savings. And then the last one here, we'll just say our other lakehouse big competitor, which frankly I still can't get a benchmark report that shows a material difference between us, which I shouldn't probably say that out loud. But this was really cool when we got sent this. And this is when we start talking about TCO, that's a material difference than just performance. And obviously we can talk about that over the booth if you're interested. So what's phase 3, right? So we agnosticated the sources, we've connected, we started looking at bringing in new modern platforms and patterns. This is the part now of going, cool, do you want to talk about enterprise mesh? You want to talk about enterprise fabric? And what does that mean on the technology side, right? Most companies live in phase 1 and 2, to be honest with you, right? The more advanced companies start shifting into 3, but we all know you don't start with the whole enterprise. You start on use cases, or you start in organizations, or you start in hot spaces, right? But the part you want to incessantly look at is I want to mature into that 3. And that 3 now is you're now fully running an open architecture and ecosystem. You are operating with much more flexibility in your implementations to be able to say, if I want to rip a Dremio out, cool, I can. Right? If I want to switch from one vendor to another, I can. The formats aren't locking me in. How I'm running it is not locking me in. See that there. So this is where I go back to that's all cool, but give me some more use cases, right? Because back again, nobody funds architecture. And my advice to you is when you are talking about these internally, obviously everybody's always interested in benchmarks too, and how they benchmark in the rest of the communities. So being able to go, this is how these companies are doing it. Here's the impact they've seen. That's my one recommendation you'd always bring in. So I'm gonna grab one of these from each of these next couple slides, and then we're gonna wrap up. My favorite here is 7-Eleven. So 7-Eleven was initially going, how do I actually do a better cost performance implementation with my Databricks and Power BI ecosystem? And they actually brought Dremio in on top of that. To be clear, not a replacement, a better together story. And what they did was to say, well, if I let Databricks do what they're amazing at, which they're world-class in my mind, the best at what they do, cool, let that run. But just from a TCO perspective and performance perspective, they were having to increase their Power BI license to premium. They had to do multiple extracts to meet the performance they needed, and their infrastructure cost was going up, while still getting DB-SQL for free. So with Dremio and Databricks together, they're actually saving over $100,000 a month. And organically, just by connecting that and moving the semantic layer up into an agnostic layer, what they're also able to do unintentionally was almost create a customer 360 ecosystem. Because all the customer data across all those different sources were now mapped into one location. And with that 100K savings per month, they're now also funding a supply chain in the future, Supply Chain 360, to combine that with how do we sell more Slurpees, right? All right? And what areas want more Slurpees versus other areas, right? They're asking better questions now to give better experience to their customer. The second one, as I mentioned, was supply chain. So what better example to give than Amazon? So Amazon's supply chain optimization team, or SCOT team, actually uses Dremio today to power their analytic workloads across the supply chain. And then Maersk, who I'd probably argue, we can figure out who 1 and 2, but in my mind I think it's really close, who has the biggest supply chain in the world. Maersk also uses Dremio with, again, Databricks and multiple of these other platforms. And what they ended up finding is already they were saving up to $4 million on their infrastructure cost just by bringing Dremio in too. And then the second piece of that is they're expecting to be able to save up to $35 million within the first 4 years of their implementation. And oh, by the way, agnostically, we are powering all their LLMs and so forth and execution of their workloads underneath the surface, so folks don't even have to know Dremio is there. And then the last one is, actually I have one more. The other part is a lot of companies just on the query engine, right? As I mentioned, kind of agnosticating even Dremio, just straight out powering the query engine. And JPMC is a great example here as a major customer for Amazon. Most all of their queries, specifically within their risk department, are actually all powered by Dremio. So again, no extracts or otherwise ever needed. And then the last slide here is, that was all cool, but remember the ugly spaghetti sheet. We still need to be able to get there, right? How are we thinking about the Oracle migrations? How are we thinking about the Hadoop migrations and modernizations? All being able to hit that as a first step. Here's a couple examples here. And again, maybe I'll grab an example like the Hartford. This is a good example where, again, a lot of this was just being able to, one, I want to run faster, smarter, and also cheaper, right? So I need all of those things. All three are possible now. So I am at time. I'm happy to dive into any of these examples. I'll throw this up here real quick. We do have a free lakehouse option, so if you wanted to get in and just try it, my biggest recommendation to you, don't listen to me, try it yourself. The second one, if you want to chat, we're happy to, right? So the proof's always in the pudding. Otherwise, thank you very much. And again, we're happy to dive into any of these examples over at the booth, right over here to the right, or your left.